At the Christmas dinner, my parents said, "In our eyes, you're already dead," while my brother sneered beside them. I calmly replied, "Understood." 5 months later, they rang the doorbell non-stop. I opened the door and said, "The dead cannot come back. My name is Leo, I'm 32 years old, and I used to think family was my safe haven. I used to believe that no matter what happened in the world outside, I could always go home." That illusion was shattered last year, at my parents' annual Christmas party, in a room filled with twinkling lights and the scent of pine. The memory is still so clear, it plays out in my mind like a scene from a movie I can't turn off. Picture this: a crowded living room, the low hum of chatter and laughter filling the air. Every eye in that room was locked on me. I had just stood up, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird, and I announced that I had married the woman I truly love. The silence that followed was so sudden and so absolute, it was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick holiday rug. My parents' faces, which had been smiling just moments before, twisted into masks of cold anger. For years, they had told me that Clara, my Clara, wasn't good enough. Not the kind of woman who could make our family proud. She was a baker, a wonderful, talented, hardworking baker who had built her own small business from the ground up. But in their eyes, that was nothing. They constantly compared her to my older brother Ethan's girlfriend, Vanessa. Vanessa was their so-called golden standard, a polished corporate executive with a high salary, a company car, and the perfect, ruthless ambition they admired. She was everything they wanted for a son. No matter how hard Clara worked, getting up before dawn to bake, managing her own staff, no matter how kind and supportive she was to me, my parents dismissed her. She was, in their words, beneath us. And then that night, with dozens of relatives and family friends watching, my parents leaned forward in their armchairs. My mother, Helen, spoke first, her voice dripping with ice. My father, David, nodded in agreement, his face grim. Together, they spat the words that cut deeper than any knife. "In our eyes, you're already dead." Beside them, my brother Ethan smirked. He didn't even try to hide it. He let out a cruel, triumphant sneer, his eyes sparkling with contempt as if he had finally, definitively won some lifelong competition I never even knew we were playing. The words hit me like a physical punch, sharp and merciless. They tore through years of me trying to prove myself, years of me trying to earn a love that I now realized was never really there for me in the first place. The room froze. I could see the shocked faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. But I didn't break. I didn't cry. Something inside me just snapped shut. I lifted my chin, looked my parents dead in the eye, and then I looked at my brother. I let my gaze linger on his smug face for a second before I said the only thing that felt right. "Understood." Then I turned, grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, took Clara's hand. Her hand was trembling, but her grip was firm, and I walked out into the cold night. I never looked back. That moment wasn't just about their cruelty. It was about me breaking free. Free from their control, free from the constant comparisons, free from a lifetime of being told I would never, ever measure up. And what happened next? The life I built and the downfall they faced. It proved everything. Months later, when they came knocking on my door, desperate and broken, I was ready with the words they'll never forget. Growing up in our perfectly manicured house in suburban Madison, everything looked perfect from the outside. But inside, my mother, Helen, ruled every corner of my life with an iron fist. From the moment I could choose, she chose for me. My schools, my friends, even which extracurriculars I was allowed to join. Her control felt like a heavy weight I couldn't shake, a constant reminder that I wasn't enough, that I needed to be molded and shaped into something better. I remember when I was 8, I wanted to try out for the Little League baseball team with all my friends. I loved the smell of the freshly cut grass, the sound of the bat hitting the ball. But Mom insisted on art classes. "It's more refined, Leo," she'd say, her voice sharp, leaving no room for argument. "It will look better on your college applications one day." So, I spent my Saturdays in a stuffy studio, trying to make my charcoal sketches look like the fruit bowl in front of me. My fingers smudged with black, only to hear her critique every crooked line when I brought them home. My father, David, rarely spoke up. He was a quiet man who retreated behind his newspaper. He'd just nod along with whatever Mom said. His silence a louder endorsement than any words could ever be. If I ever tried to push back, to argue for a choice of my own, he'd just mutter, "Listen to your mother, son," and disappear back into the business section. The person I was always measured against, the standard I could never meet, was my older brother, Ethan. Ethan was the golden child. He excelled in school without seeming to try, his report cards a sea of perfect A's. He was the captain of the football team, the president of the student council. Mom praised him endlessly. "Ethan is going places," she would say at the dinner table, her eyes fixed on him with adoration. I'd just sit there, pushing food around my plate, feeling completely invisible. Ethan didn't help. He seemed to enjoy his position as the favorite. He'd smirk when I struggled with my math homework, ruffling my hair and saying, "It's not that hard, little brother. Just try to keep up." His taunts stung, but I learned to keep quiet, because arguing would only lead to another lecture from Mom about my bad attitude. I remember one time I brought home a B+ on a history paper. I had worked so hard on it, staying up late in the library, and I was genuinely proud. I showed it to Mom, my hands shaking a little with hope. She scanned the paper, her brow furrowed in a familiar line of disappointment. She handed it back to me. "It's acceptable," she said, her voice flat. "But Ethan got an A on his last paper. Why can't you be more like your brother?" I was 12, and those words burned themselves into my memory. The pride I felt curdled into shame. School was my mother's battleground. She picked my classes, vetoing electives like woodshop because they were a waste of time for a boy with your potential. Instead, she demanded I join the debate team to build character. I hated it. I would stumble over my arguments, my face turning red in front of a room full of judging eyes. But Mom would sit in the audience, her intense stare boring into me, pushing me to perform. When I lost a match, she'd lecture me the whole drive home about my lack of effort and discipline. "You're embarrassing us," she'd snap. I would just nod, swallowing my frustration, knowing it was pointless to argue. My friends weren't really mine either. Mom disapproved of anyone she deemed a bad influence. I learned to hide my friendships, to lie about where I was going, just to have a few hours of feeling like a normal kid. By the time I was in high school, I was exhausted. I was juggling Mom's impossible demands and Ethan's casual cruelty, all while trying to carve out some small piece of myself. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, dreaming of a life where I could make my own choices, where my own voice mattered. That dream felt so far away, but it was the one spark that kept me going through the darkness. The moment I truly understood the depths of my family's favoritism wasn't about a grade or a sport. It was about something far more significant. It was about my inheritance. My grandmother, my mom's mother, had always been my champion. She was the one person who saw me, the real me. She loved my drawings and would always tell me I had the soul of an artist. When she passed away when I was 19, it left a huge hole in my life. In her will, she left a specific bequest for me, $20,000. I remember the lawyer reading it out loud. The will explicitly stated the money was to be held in a trust until I turned 21, and it was her wish that I use it to further my creative pursuits. It was her final gift, her way of telling me to follow my dreams. For 2 years, I planned what I would do with that money. It was my escape plan. I was going to use it for a down payment on a small studio space after college, to buy professional equipment, to finally start my own design business without having to beg my parents for a loan they would never approve of. That $20,000 wasn't just money. It was freedom. It was my grandmother's belief in me, made tangible. The week of my 21st birthday, I called the lawyer who managed the trust to arrange the transfer. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Leo," he said, his voice sounding uncomfortable. "The funds were dispersed from the trust nearly 18 months ago." I felt the blood drain from my face. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "That's impossible." He then explained that my parents, as my legal guardians at the time of the will's execution, had petitioned the court. They had argued that a more prudent financial opportunity had arisen that would benefit the family as a whole. They had legally taken control of my inheritance. That night I confronted them. I walked into the living room, the legal papers the lawyer had faxed me clutched in my hand. "Where is my money?" I asked, my voice shaking with a rage I had never felt before. "Grandma's money." My mother didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. She put down her teacup and looked at me as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. "We invested it, Leo," she said calmly. "It was the sensible thing to do." "Invested it where?" I pressed, my voice rising. My father finally looked up from his newspaper. "We used it to help Ethan with the down payment on his first investment property," he said, as if it were the most reasonable thing in the world. "Real estate is a much safer bet than your little art projects. Ethan knows how to make money grow. This is for the good of the family." The room spun. They had taken my dream, my grandmother's last wish for me, and handed it over to my brother without a second thought. I turned to Ethan, who was standing in the doorway, listening to the whole thing. "You knew?" I asked him, my heart breaking. "You knew and you took it?" He just shrugged, a familiar, dismissive gesture. "Dad and Mom thought it was for the best," he said, not a hint of remorse in his voice. "Don't be so dramatic, Leo. It's just money." But it wasn't just money. It was the ultimate betrayal. It was them telling me, in the clearest way possible, that my dreams were worthless, and his were everything. They didn't just give him my money. They gave him my future, the one my grandmother had wanted for me. That night, I packed a bag and left. I stayed on a friend's couch for a week before finding a cheap room to rent. I knew then that I had to get away. I had to build a life so far from their influence that they could never touch anything I loved again. Starting at the University of Wisconsin felt like taking my first breath of fresh air after being underwater for years. For the first time, I wasn't Ethan's little brother or Helen's son. I was just Leo, and I was finally free. I threw myself into my major, industrial design. It was a perfect blend of the artistry my grandmother had encouraged and the practical, problem-solving skills I knew I possessed. My first class, a workshop on product design, felt like a revelation. I spent hours in the studio, sketching prototypes, building models, and pitching ideas to my classmates. For once, I wasn't chasing someone else's approval. I was creating things because I loved the process. My professor, a sharp, no-nonsense man named Mr. Albright, saw something in me. After I presented a final project, a redesign of a common kitchen tool, he pulled me aside. "You've got a real talent, Leo," he said, looking at me over the top of his glasses. "You have a good eye and a clean style. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words were simple, but they lit a fire in me. It was the validation I had craved my entire life, and it wasn't from my family. It was from a professional, someone who knew what they were talking about. It gave me a drive to build something of my own. Outside of class, I slowly started to build a life. I got a part-time job at a campus coffee shop to pay my rent, and I started making a few friends. But freedom came with a price. My mother still called every Sunday, her voice a critical drone over the phone. "Industrial design? What kind of a career is that? Are you sure you shouldn't switch to business?" Like Ethan did. I'd grip the receiver, forcing a calm reply, but her words still had the power to plant seeds of doubt. My dad, as usual, stayed out of it, leaving me to face her criticism alone. One brisk spring afternoon, my beat-up old car broke down on a quiet street a few miles from campus. I was frustrated and late for a study group. I managed to coast into the parking lot of a small shopping plaza and saw a little bakery on the corner. It was called The Sweet Spot, with a charming hand-painted sign. I figured I could at least get a coffee while I called for a tow truck. That's when I met Clara. She was behind the counter, her hands dusted with flour, a smudge on her cheek. She was in the middle of decorating a cake, her brow furrowed in concentration. She looked up when I came in, and her smile was like sunshine breaking through a cloudy day. "Rough day?" she asked, noticing the grease on my hands. I explained my situation, and she immediately offered me a free coffee and a pastry. "On the house," she said. "You look like you need it." We started talking. She told me how she'd opened the bakery 2 years ago, using her life savings and a small business loan. She talked about her passion for baking with the same intensity one felt about design. She loved solving problems, figuring out the perfect balance of ingredients. I was captivated. Most people my parents approved of only talked about their salary or their next promotion. Clara talked about her craft. Her pride in her work was so genuine, so different from the polished ambition my family valued. I left her bakery that day with a working car. Her cousin happened to be a mechanic and she called him for me, and her phone number. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. Clara and I started seeing each other. With her, I didn't have to perform. She'd listen when I ranted about a tough project or my mom's latest critique. Never judging, always steady. "You are enough, Leo," she'd say, squeezing my hand. Those simple words were a balm to the wounds my family had inflicted over the years. With Clara, I was finally learning to trust myself, to hold on to that spark Mr. Albright had seen. But deep down, I knew that bringing her into my family's world would be the ultimate test. After dating for over a year, I knew I couldn't hide Clara from my family forever. I loved her, and I was ready to share the one person who made me feel truly seen and valued. So, I invited them out to dinner at a nice, neutral restaurant downtown. I thought maybe, just maybe, on neutral ground they would behave. I was wrong. The car ride to the restaurant was tense. I kept rehearsing things to say in my head. Clara squeezed my hand. "It's going to be okay," she said, her voice calm and steadying. "We'll handle it together." Her confidence helped, but I couldn't shake the knot of dread in my stomach. I felt like I was leading a lamb to the slaughter. We sat down at a round table, the air already thick with unspoken expectations. My mother, Helen, started with small talk, but her eyes were scanning Clara like she was a specimen under a microscope. "So, Clara," she began, her tone overly polite, which was always a warning sign. "Leo tells us you own a small business. How quaint. What is it that you do?" Clara answered confidently, explaining her passion for baking, how she had built her shop from nothing. I smiled, so proud of her poise and her passion. But my mother's face tightened. "A baker," she said, the words dripping with disbelief. "That's a very hands-on." My father, sitting across from her, just nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. I gripped my fork, sensing the storm that was brewing. My brother, Ethan, never one to miss an opportunity to stir the pot, leaned forward with a smug grin. "You know," he said, his eyes flicking from me to Clara, "my girlfriend Vanessa just closed a multi-million-dollar deal for her firm last week. She's the vice president of acquisitions now." He took a sip of his wine, his smirk unmistakable. It was a jab meant to diminish Clara, to put her in her place. I shot him a look, a silent warning, but he just raised an eyebrow, daring me to respond. Clara, to her credit, stayed perfectly calm. "That sounds very impressive," she said, her tone even and polite, but I could feel the air growing thicker, the weight of their judgment pressing down on us. My mother didn't let it go. "Leo, you're a designer," she said, cutting into her steak with sharp, precise movements. "You have a bright future. You need someone ambitious, someone on your level. A baker doesn't exactly match that, does it?" Her words sliced through me, dismissing Clara, dismissing our relationship, like it was a temporary, embarrassing phase. I opened my mouth to protest, but my dad chimed in for the first time all night. "Your mother is right, son," he said, his voice soft but firm, which was somehow worse than yelling. "You shouldn't settle for less." Settle. The word hung in the air, ugly and insulting. I felt my face flush, a hot anger bubbling up in my chest. Clara reached for my hand under the table, her touch a grounding force, but I wasn't going to stay silent. "Her job doesn't define who she is," I said, my voice steady despite the heat I felt. "Clara is the most hardworking, honest, and supportive person I have ever met. She supports me in ways you never have." The table went quiet. Forks paused midair. My mother's eyes narrowed into slits. "Don't you dare talk to us like that," she snapped. "We have given you everything. You owe us better choices." That's when Ethan laughed. A short, mocking sound. "Oh, come on, Leo. You're dating a baker. Vanessa has a penthouse downtown. What's Clara got? A bread box." His words were pure venom. I saw Clara flinch, just for a second, though she kept her composure. That was it. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. I stood up. "Clara is more of a family to me than any of you have ever been," I said, my voice shaking with years of pent-up frustration. I looked from Ethan to my mother, then to my father. "She respects me. You just want to control me." My mother slammed her hand on the table, rattling the glasses. "Enough. You are throwing away your future for her. You need to choose, Leo. It's us or it's her." Her ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and final. I looked at Clara, and in her eyes, I saw nothing but love and trust. She was letting me make the choice, and for the first time it wasn't a hard choice at all. I thought of all the years I'd spent shrinking myself to fit their mold. I thought about my stolen inheritance. I thought about all the lonely nights I'd spent feeling like I wasn't enough. "I choose Clara," I said, my voice clear and strong. My mother gasped. My father just shook his head in disappointment. And Ethan scoffed, muttering, "You're a fool." I dropped my napkin on the table, grabbed Clara's hand, and we walked out of that restaurant, leaving them sitting there in a stunned, angry silence. That night, I knew their approval wasn't worth losing myself for, but I had no idea how much worse it was about to get. A few months after that explosive dinner, the dreaded Christmas party at my parents' house arrived. The air in their home was heavy with tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. I had been dreading it for weeks, knowing my mother, father, and Ethan would be watching my every move. Clara and I had made a bold choice just a few days before. We went to a small courthouse in Madison with just 2 friends as witnesses, and we got married. We didn't tell anyone. We didn't want their judgment, their criticism, to taint our moment. It was ours. But that night, standing in their house, I decided it was time to share the truth. It was time to stop hiding. My heart pounded as we walked in, Clara's hand steady in mine. I wore a simple sweater and slacks, my new wedding band feeling heavy and significant in my pocket. I felt like I was stepping onto a battlefield. Dinner started quietly enough. Aunts and uncles chatted about the weather and their vacation plans. My mother kept glancing at me, her smile so tight it looked painful, while my dad sipped his wine, pointedly avoiding my gaze. Ethan sat across from us, next to Vanessa, his eyes darting between me and Clara, a smirk playing on his lips. I could feel the weight of their expectations, the same ones I'd been fighting against my whole life. Halfway through the meal, between the turkey and the pie, I stood up. My hands were trembling, but my resolve was firm. "I have something I'd like to say," I announced, my voice cutting through the low chatter. All eyes turned to me. I took a deep breath, slipped the ring onto my finger, and held up my hand. Then I reached for Clara's hand, lifting it to show her matching ring. "Clara and I got married last week." I looked at her, and she gave me a small, brave nod of pride. The room froze. Then, my mother's face turned a deep, blotchy red. Her fork clattered onto her plate. "Married?" she hissed, her voice low but venomous. "To her." My father's jaw tightened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his wine glass. Before I could even respond, they both stood up, their voices rising in a terrible unison. "In our eyes, you're already dead." My mother spat, her words slicing through the shocked silence of the room. My father echoed her, his voice cold and hard as stone. "You've thrown your life away, Leo." The relatives gasped. I heard someone whisper, "Oh my goodness." I felt the air leave my lungs. Their words were a betrayal so sharp, so final. It felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. Ethan broke the silence. He didn't just laugh. He threw his head back and roared with laughter, a cruel, ugly sound. His eyes gleamed with malice. "A secret wedding with Clara. he said, his voice dripping with scorn. What was it? A quickie at some rundown courthouse. You couldn't even afford a real ceremony. His words were designed to mock our choice, to dismiss the love we had built as something cheap and insignificant. Clara's hand tightened in mine, but she stayed silent, her dignity a shield against his taunts. I looked at him, then at my parents, their faces hard with disgust. Years of their control, their criticism, their dismissal of everything I was, flashed through my mind. Every moment I tried to please them, every time I'd been pushed aside for Ethan. This was the final straw. I stood up taller, my voice steady despite the searing pain in my chest. I locked eyes with my mother, then my father, then Ethan. Understood, I said. The word hung in the air, simple but absolute. I turned to Clara, her gaze unwavering, and we walked toward the door. Ethan called after me, his tone mocking. Running away already, little brother? Typical. I didn't look back. A few relatives murmured my name. Some even pleaded for me to stay. But their voices faded as we stepped outside into the biting December air. The cold hit my face, but I felt lighter. Like a heavy chain that had been around my neck my entire life had finally snapped. The drive back to our small apartment was completely silent. The radio was off. The only sounds were the tires humming on the cold pavement and the occasional sniffle from Clara beside me. I stared straight ahead, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, replaying the scene over and over in my head. In our eyes, you're already dead. The words echoed, each one a fresh stab of pain. When we finally got inside our apartment, the warmth and the quiet felt like a sanctuary. Clara took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug. And that's when the dam finally broke. I buried my face in her shoulder and I cried. I cried for the little boy who just wanted his parents' approval, for the teenager who felt invisible, and for the man who had just been disowned by his entire family on Christmas. Clara just held me, stroking my hair, letting me release all the years of pain and frustration. After a long time, my tears subsided, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up my phone, and opened my contacts. My mother's name. I stared at it for a second, then my thumb pressed down. Block. My father's name. Block. Ethan. Block. I went through my call logs and deleted their voicemails. I opened my messages and erased our text threads. With each tap of the screen, I felt another link in that heavy chain breaking. Clara came over and put a steaming mug of tea in my hands. Are you okay? She asked softly. I nodded, taking a sip. The warmth spread through my chest. I will be, I said, my voice hoarse. We're done with them. For good. That night, we didn't talk much more. We just sat together on our worn-out couch, wrapped in a blanket, finding comfort in our shared silence. It was a night of mourning, in a way. I was mourning the family I thought I had, the family I had always wished for. The next weekend, I drove to the storage unit where I kept the few boxes of belongings from my childhood bedroom. I had been meaning to sort through them for months, but now it felt urgent. Clara came with me. We opened the first box. It was filled with old-school projects, dusty trophies from the debate team I hated, and framed photos. There was one of me and Ethan as kids, both of us with goofy, gap-toothed smiles. For a moment, a pang of sadness hit me. But then I remembered his sneer at the Christmas party, the look of triumph in his eyes. Clara watched me, her expression full of understanding. What do you want to do with all this? She asked gently. I looked at the box, at the relics of a life that no longer felt like mine. I don't want it, I said. I didn't want the constant reminders of a past where I was always second best, always a disappointment. We didn't throw it away. That felt too dramatic, too angry. We just taped the boxes back up, pushed them to the very back of the storage unit and closed the door, leaving the past behind, literally. Walking out of that storage facility and back into the sunlight felt symbolic. It wasn't just about leaving a party or blocking some numbers. It was about reclaiming my life. It was about choosing my own family, the one sitting right next to me in the car. I didn't know what lay ahead, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I would never let them define me again. My life was mine now. Starting over was harder than I imagined. Clara and I were determined to build our future, but it felt like we were fighting against invisible headwinds. I had officially launched my own freelance industrial design business, Leo Sterling Designs, operating out of a small, rented studio space that took up most of our savings. In the beginning, things looked promising. I landed a few small projects designing logos and product packaging for local businesses. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start, and it was mine. Then things started to go wrong. I had a meeting with a promising new client, a startup that needed a complete product design for their new tech gadget. The meeting went great. They loved my portfolio, my ideas, my energy. They told me I was their top choice and that they'd be sending over the contract by the end of the week. I was ecstatic. This was the big break I needed, a contract that would not only pay our bills for months, but would also be a huge boost to my reputation. I took Clara out for a celebratory dinner, feeling like I was finally on the right track. The end of the week came and went. No contract. I sent a polite follow-up email on Monday. The reply I got back was a single, cold sentence. "Thank you for your time, but we have decided to go in another direction." No explanation. No apology. They wouldn't even take my calls. I was devastated and confused. A week later, the same thing happened with another potential client. A fantastic meeting, enthusiastic promises, followed by sudden, inexplicable silence. I started to feel a creeping sense of paranoia. It felt personal. One afternoon, I ran into an old colleague from an internship I had done in college. We were catching up over coffee when he said something that made my blood run cold. "Hey, it's weird," he said, stirring his latte. "I was talking to a guy from that new tech startup, the one you pitched to. He mentioned your name. He said someone on their board had heard from a reliable source that you were difficult to work with and unreliable on deadlines." I felt a hot flash crawl up my neck. A reliable source? Who? My colleague just shrugged. He didn't say. Just that it was someone well-connected in the Madison business community. And then I knew. It was Ethan. Of course, it was Ethan. His girlfriend, Vanessa, was a high-powered executive. They moved in circles I could only dream of. It would be so easy for them to drop a little poison in the right person's ear, to cast a shadow of doubt over my name before I even had a chance to prove myself. They weren't just content with casting me out. They were actively trying to destroy my livelihood. The financial strain became immense. The few small projects I had weren't enough. Bills started piling up on our kitchen table. I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, the numbers running through my head. We burned through our savings just to pay the rent for my studio and our apartment. One night, I found Clara staring at a stack of invoices for her bakery, her face pale with worry. We were in trouble, deep trouble. We had a tense conversation about our finances, the unspoken fear hanging between us, that we might lose everything we were trying to build. I remember sitting alone in my studio late one night. The space that had once felt so full of promise now just felt empty and cold. I was surrounded by my sketches, my models, my dreams, but I had no clients and our bank account was nearly empty. I put my head in my hands, feeling the crushing weight of failure. My family had cast me out, and now they were making sure I had nowhere else to go. I felt utterly and completely defeated, with no idea what to do next. Thank you for staying with me until now. Please show your support by liking this video and typing 1 in the comments below. It lets me know that you've given me a like and are here with me on this journey. Your encouragement is a huge source of motivation. Comment number 1 below and stay with me as I continue my story. Just when I thought we had hit rock bottom, the idea came. And it didn't come from me. It came from Clara. It was a miserable, rainy Tuesday night. I had just gotten another rejection email, and I was sitting at our small kitchen table, staring blankly at a wall, feeling lower than I ever had in my life. Clara was quietly working at the other end of the table. She had her own notebooks out and was sketching new ideas for pastry designs and menus for her bakery. She had been trying to rebrand the Sweet Spot, to give it a more modern, cohesive look, but she was struggling to find a designer she could afford who understood her vision. Suddenly, she looked up from her sketchbook, her eyes wide. "Leo," she said, her voice filled with a sudden excitement that cut through my gloomy mood. What if we did it together?" I looked at her, confused. "Did what together?" "This," she said, gesturing between her baking sketches and my design portfolio, which was sitting dejectedly on the chair next to me. "You're a brilliant designer. I'm a baker. We're both trying to build something. What if we combine our businesses? What if we create a company that doesn't just design products, but designs experiences? We could specialize in branding and interior design for food businesses, cafes, restaurants, bakeries, like mine." A spark ignited inside me. The idea was brilliant. It was unique. It took my skills and her expertise and combined them into something new and powerful. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of hope. That night, we stayed up until 3 a.m., fueled by coffee and excitement, brainstorming. We sketched out a business plan on a napkin. We would call it Clara and Leo Designs. She would provide the industry insight, the understanding of workflow and customer experience in a food environment. I would handle the branding, the logo design, the interior layouts, the custom furniture. Our first client was the sweet spot. We used what little money we had left to give her bakery a complete makeover. I designed a new logo, sleek and modern but still warm and inviting. I designed new packaging, menus, and signage. I even designed and built custom display cases that were more beautiful and functional. The transformation was stunning. When we had our grand reopening, the response was immediate. Customers loved the new look. Sales at her bakery increased by 30% in the first month. A local food blogger wrote a glowing article about the bakery's redesign. She praised the seamless blend of delicious food and beautiful, intelligent design. That article was the break we needed. Suddenly, my phone started ringing. It wasn't the big tech startups my brother had poisoned against me. It was people like us. Small business owners. Chefs, coffee shop owners, entrepreneurs who had poured their life savings into their dreams and wanted a space that reflected their passion. They understood what we were doing because we were one of them. Our company started to grow one project at a time. Each successful redesign became a living, breathing advertisement for our next job. We were building something real, something tangible, and we were doing it together. We were no longer just surviving, we were thriving. And we were doing it completely on our own terms, far from the shadows of my family. About a year after we launched Clara and Leo Designs, our business was booming. We had moved into a proper office space and even hired our first 2 employees. Life was good. We were busy, happy, and financially stable for the first time. The constant worry that had been my companion for so long had finally started to fade. One sunny afternoon, I was doing a final walkthrough of our latest project, a chic, minimalist coffee shop downtown that we had just finished designing. As I was admiring the custom light fixtures we had created, I heard a familiar voice call my name. "Leo? Leo Sterling? Is that you?" I turned around and saw Mr. Peterson, our old next-door neighbor. He was a kind, retired man who had always been friendly to me, even when my parents were being particularly difficult. I hadn't seen him in years, not since I had cut ties with my family. "Mr. Peterson," I said, a genuine smile spreading across my face as I shook his hand. "It's so good to see you." He looked around the coffee shop, his eyes wide with admiration. "This is incredible," he said. "My wife told me a new place opened up here, but I had no idea it was your work. It's beautiful." "Thank you," I said, feeling a swell of pride. "My wife, Clara, and I have a design firm now." We sat down at one of the small tables, and he bought us both a coffee. We chatted for a while, catching up on the years that had passed. He asked how I was doing, and his question felt genuine, not just polite. I told him I was happy, that I was married to a wonderful woman, and that our business was doing well. I didn't mention my family, and I hoped he wouldn't either. But after a long pause, he looked at me with a sad, sympathetic expression. "Leo," he said, his voice gentle, "I'm sure you've heard what's happened with your family." My stomach tightened. "No," I said honestly, "I haven't." We don't speak. He nodded slowly, as if he had expected that. I thought that might be the case, he said. Well, things have not been good for them. Not good at all. He then proceeded to tell me the story, not with any hint of gossip or malice, but with the quiet sadness of a long-time observer. He told me that my parents had sold their house, the house I grew up in, the house my mother had been so proud of, about 6 months ago. They had poured all their money, a lifetime of savings, into a surefire investment opportunity that Ethan had brought to them. He told me that Ethan had lost his high-paying job, and that the family was in serious financial trouble. They're renting a small apartment over on the east side now, he said, shaking his head. It's been a terrible downfall for them. Helen. She doesn't look like the same woman. I just sat there, listening, the coffee growing cold in my hands. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a strange, distant sense of detachment. It was like he was telling me a story about people I used to know a long, long time ago. Their lives, their choices, their downfall. It had nothing to do with me anymore. I had my own life now, a life I had built from the ashes of the one they had tried to burn down. I thought that was the end of the story Mr. Peterson had to tell. A sad, pathetic tale of my family's poor judgment coming back to haunt them. But there was more. He leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. But that's not the whole story, Leo. The part that no one really talks about is the why. My curiosity was piqued. What do you mean? I asked. The investment, he said, shaking his head. It wasn't just a bad investment. It was a complete scam. And the person who scammed them, well, that's the real kicker. He took a deep breath before he continued. It was Ethan's girlfriend, Vanessa. I stared at him, stunned into silence. Vanessa, the polished, perfect executive? The golden standard my parents had worshipped? It didn't make any sense. But why? I finally managed to ask. Why would she do that to them? Revenge, Mr. Peterson said, the word hanging in the air. He explained that his own son had worked at the same investment firm as Ethan and Vanessa years ago, back when they were all just junior associates trying to make a name for themselves. He had witnessed the whole thing. Apparently, Vanessa had been a brilliant, hardworking young woman. She had single-handedly developed a complex investment strategy for a major client. But Ethan, ever the opportunist, had seen his chance. He stole her work, presented it to the board as his own, and got a huge promotion. Vanessa, meanwhile, was accused of incompetence and was quietly pushed out of the firm. It had ruined her career at the time, and she had to start all over again. She never forgot, Mr. Peterson said, his eyes wide. She spent years rebuilding her career, climbing the ladder at another company, all while planning her payback. Getting close to Ethan was the final step. She played the part perfectly. She was everything your parents ever wanted in a daughter-in-law. She charmed them, won their trust completely. The plan she had concocted was meticulous. She created a fake real estate development project, complete with glossy brochures, fake architectural plans, and a convincing prospectus. She told Ethan and my parents it was an exclusive off-market deal, a chance to triple their investment in 1 year. She made them feel special, like they were being let in on a secret that only the smartest people knew about. Blinded by greed and their own arrogance, they fell for it completely. They liquidated everything. They sold the house, cashed out their retirement funds, and gave every last penny to Vanessa to invest on their behalf. The day after the wire transfer went through, Vanessa vanished. Her phone was disconnected. Her office at her firm said she had resigned a week earlier. The real estate project, of course, didn't exist. She was gone, and so was their money. All of it. Ethan, in his frantic search for answers, apparently found an old, encrypted file on her laptop that she had accidentally left behind. It contained all the evidence of his theft from years ago, along with a short, brutal note. Now we're even. I sat back in my chair, completely floored. It was a revenge plot so cold, so calculated, it was almost brilliant. Ethan's own cruelty, his own arrogance and dishonesty from years ago, had come back to destroy not just him, but our entire family. They hadn't just been the victims of a random scam. They had been the architects of their own destruction, and I had absolutely nothing to do with it. 5 months to the day after that terrible Christmas party, my doorbell rang. It wasn't a casual buzz. It was a series of long, insistent rings, one after another, filled with a sense of desperation. I was in our apartment, sketching out a new restaurant layout, and the sound jolted me. Clara looked at me from the kitchen, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. I shook my head. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. My heart stopped. Standing there on my doorstep were my mother, my father, and my brother. They looked like ghosts. My mother, Helen, who had always been so impeccably dressed, looked years older. Her hair was unkempt, and there were dark circles under her eyes. My father, David, was stooped, his shoulders slumped in defeat, his eyes avoiding the peephole. And Ethan, the arrogant, confident smirk was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. His usual expensive suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, wrinkled polo shirt. I took a deep breath and opened the door. For a moment, we all just stood there in silence. Then my mother spoke, her voice trembling and weak. "Leo," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. We need to talk." I didn't invite them in. I just stood there in the doorway, my arms crossed, waiting. They started talking, their words stumbling over each other in a frantic, disjointed mess. They were sorry. So sorry for the party, for their judgment, for pushing me away, for everything. Ethan, unbelievably, was the one who spoke the most. "I was a fool, Leo," he said, his voice cracking. "I was arrogant. I was wrong. We were all wrong. We lost everything." He told me about Vanessa, about the scam, about how they were completely broke. Then came the real reason for their visit. My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. "We were wondering," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Your business is doing so well. We thought, maybe you could help us. Alone, just to get back on our feet." I listened to it all, my heart rate steady, my mind clear. The old Leo would have been torn apart. The old Leo might have even felt a pang of pity. But that Leo was gone. He had died in their living room on Christmas Day. I looked at each of them, at the faces of the people who had caused me so much pain. I thought about my stolen inheritance, the years of feeling worthless, the sabotage of my career, the cruel words they had hurled at me. And I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, just a calm, quiet finality. I took a breath and said the words that had been waiting for 5 months. "The dead cannot come back," I said, my voice calm but firm as steel. Their faces fell. My mother let out a small sob. My father's jaw tightened, and Ethan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it gently, the soft click of the lock echoing in the sudden silence of the hallway. I leaned my back against the door, and for the first time, I felt truly, completely free. Clara came and wrapped her arms around me. The weight of my past had finally been lifted. This was my boundary. This was my final stand. And I had won. Life after that final encounter was peaceful. It was like the last ghost from my past had finally been laid to rest. Without the constant background noise of their drama and disapproval, Clara and I were able to pour all of our energy into the things that truly mattered. Our life together and our growing business. Clara and Leo Designs became more successful than we ever could have dreamed. Our unique niche of creating holistic brand experiences for food businesses really took off. We were featured in design magazines and on popular food blogs. We went from being a 2-person team working out of our kitchen to a thriving company with a dozen employees and a long waiting list of clients. I found that I had a real knack for managing the creative side of the business, and my promotion to creative director felt earned and satisfying. We were making a great salary, but more importantly, we were doing work we loved, with people we respected. After a few years of saving, we bought a house. It wasn't a huge, sterile mansion like the one I grew up in. It was an old farmhouse about 40 minutes outside of Madison, with a big wraparound porch, a huge yard, and an old barn out back. The first thing we did was convert the barn into a state-of-the-art workshop and design studio for me and a professional test kitchen for Clara. It was our own creative paradise. We spent our weekends painting rooms, planting a garden, and just enjoying the quiet. We adopted a rescue dog, a goofy golden retriever we named Gus, who filled the house with happy, chaotic energy. Our happiness wasn't loud or flashy. It was in the small, everyday moments. It was in cooking dinner together after a long day, our hands bumping as we reached for the same utensil. It was in walking with Gus through the fields behind our house as the sun set. It was in sitting on the porch swing on a warm summer night, sharing a bottle of wine and talking about our dreams for the future. We had built a life that was real, grounded in mutual respect, partnership, and a deep, quiet love. One crisp autumn evening, about 2 years after we moved into the house, Clara came out to my workshop. I was working on a new furniture design, and she just stood in the doorway for a moment, a strange, beautiful smile on her face. She was holding a small, gift-wrapped box. "I have something for you," she said. I opened it. Inside was a tiny pair of baby shoes. I looked up at her, my heart suddenly pounding in my chest, and saw tears of joy welling up in her eyes. I didn't need to ask. I just scooped her up in my hug, spinning her around in the sawdust-filled air, laughing and crying at the same time. We were going to be parents. We were going to start our own family, a family built on a foundation of love and support, a family that would be everything mine never was. I was no longer the boy who shrank to fit a mold. With Clara by my side, I was building a life that was true, a life where I defined my own worth. And it was more wonderful than anything I had ever dared to dream. Every now and then, I'd get a small second-hand update on my old family's situation. Mr. Peterson would occasionally email, not to gossip, but just to check in. From him, I learned that their lives had continued on a downward spiral after I had closed the door on them. My parents never recovered financially. They were forced to declare bankruptcy. The stress, apparently, took a massive toll on my father's health. He had a minor heart attack, and while he recovered, he was never the same. He lost his consulting business, and they were living off of Social Security in a cramped, run-down apartment complex for seniors. Mr. Peterson said my mother had become a bitter, reclusive woman who rarely left the apartment and blamed everyone but herself for their misfortune. The vibrant, controlling matriarch I had known was gone, replaced by a frail, angry old woman. Ethan's fate was, in a way, the most poetic. Without his father's money and his mother's connections, he was just another guy with a tarnished reputation and a mountain of debt. He couldn't find a job in the corporate world anymore. The story of what Vanessa had done to him had spread like wildfire through Madison's business circles. Nobody wanted to hire a man who had been so thoroughly and publicly conned. The last I heard, he was working a string of low-wage jobs to make ends meet. He was a night stalker at a grocery store for a while, then a cashier at a gas station. The stark contrast between his old life and his new one was almost hard to fathom. This was the man who had mocked my wife for being a baker, who had sneered at my dreams. Now he was the one living a life of quiet desperation. I only saw him one more time with my own eyes. It was about a year before our son was born. I was driving through a less-than-great part of town after meeting with a supplier, and I stopped for gas. As I was filling my tank, I saw him. It was Ethan. He was the one working the cash register, wearing a stained, ill-fitting uniform. He looked tired and thin. The arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by a defeated slump in his shoulders. Our eyes met through the grimy plexiglass. For a split second, there was a flash of recognition in his eyes, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated shame. He immediately looked down, busying himself with arranging some lottery tickets, hoping I hadn't seen him. I didn't say anything. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in seeing him like that. There was just a profound sense of sadness for the person he could have been if he hadn't been so consumed by cruelty and greed. I finished pumping my gas, got back in my car, and drove away. I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. There was nothing left for me there. His choices had led him to that counter. My choices had led me home, to Clara, and to the beautiful life we had built together. We were worlds apart now, and that was exactly as it should be. So that's my story. It's not just a story about a family falling apart. It's a story about finding the strength to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. For years, I carried their expectations, their judgment, their disappointment, hoping that one day, I would finally earn their acceptance. But that day never came, and cutting ties with them, as painful as it was the single most liberating thing I have ever done. It freed me to live authentically, to choose who I let into my life. I learned a hard truth. Setting boundaries is the only way to protect your peace. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to let go of the people who are hurting you, even if they share your blood. Family isn't an obligation when it comes with disrespect. True family, I've learned, isn't something you're born into. It's something you build. It's a choice. It's the people who choose to stand by you, to lift you up, to see you for who you are and love you not in spite of it, but because of it. Clara showed me what a family could be. Supportive, not suffocating. My son, who is now a happy, healthy 2-year-old, will grow up knowing he is loved for exactly who he is, not for who we want him to be. That is the legacy I want to create. I'm stronger now, not because I rejected my parents and my brother, but because I finally chose myself. I chose my own happiness, my own peace, my own future, and I have never, for one single moment, regretted it. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, and it is so good. To everyone listening, thank you for following my story. It's not just mine. It's a reminder to all of us to stand up for our own worth. You deserve to be treated with love and respect, and anyone who can't give you that doesn't deserve a place in your life. Have you ever faced tough family dynamics? How did you learn to set boundaries and protect your own peace? Share your thoughts and your own stories in the comments below. Let's start a conversation about building healthier, happier relationships. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard. Thank you again for listening.